As we all know by now, the relationship between Logan Paul and George Janko has completely broken down. From being best friends in 2016 to now public enemies in 2024, the whole storyline has been heavily documented on YouTube, with many highlighting the friendship was never the same after George walked out from the infamous Bobby Lee episode.
No, stop, George. I want you over here with me.
Many YouTubers began labeling George as a comedian that couldn't take a joke, which in return would damage his reputation. Things wouldn't get better as a few episodes later, as Logan would insult George's religion, leaving a stain on their friendship forever.
One that really hurt me is you told me I need a therapist because I believe in Jesus.
It is common knowledge that you don't interpret reality like reality happens.
Judging from past co-hosts like Spencer and Mark, many believe this would be the beginning of the end of George's tenure on Impaulsive, and fans would be right as a few months later George disappeared from the podcast. This led viewers with many concerning questions, but not many answers. George, Mike and Logan were noticed to be very quiet during this period. However, as weeks went on, they started to address the situation.
I love this outlet. I love this outlet, and it exists because people watch. And without people watching, I just have a show like
Judging by Logan and Mike's responses, it didn't end with integrity, but obviously very bitterly. This clip became viral online, leading thousands of fans to message George and make him aware of Logan's snaky behaviour. In return, George replied on Twitter, and it was exposed Logan had silenced George on speaking out. To the Impaulsive fans, I'm so sorry I can't speak out about things. I do love you guys, and for those of you sending me the clip of them talking shit, it's all love. I've already moved on from that toxic environment. Fans had speculated if George was legally withheld on discussing the situation. A few months later, George would confirm this with Howie, explaining he was told the severity of the consequences if he didn't comply.
On a serious note, what is the biggest misconception of you and what happened there that bothered you? And it's not true. And maybe they got that misconception because of the way you were editorialized.
They very much made it clear that I'm not allowed to speak up, so I can't even.
Legally?
Yeah.
Was this I didn't know that you guys were in a legal.
Well, he likes to tend to argue with me. I said, okay, then how about we discuss this, what you've guys done. Let's talk about this. And he goes, yeah, do it. And then I go, okay. And so I tweeted out, I wasn't going to talk out of respect for the man.
So,
and then his attorneys hit me up and said, hey, let me remind you about the stuff you've signed.
He said, I can talk about anything.
Yeah, I mean,
knowing that you can't.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
George would later say that the Bobby Lee episode was heavily edited to manipulate the audience into believing he couldn't take a joke.
What is the misconception that came out to that wide audience that is not true that you want to clear up right now to my audience?
That Bobby Lee episode was edited, and they made me look like I wasn't a comedian that can't take a joke, even though every episode they make jokes on. And the reason I walked away was definitely not put in there.
It was publicly known it was George's decision to leave the show, and it's left viewers to speculate and identify the reasons why. It would later be revealed that Logan and Mike had offered George the opportunity to come back on the show, yet he rejected it and decided to take a leap of faith and continue his own podcast. To many, this showed George's character. As while Impaulsive may be seen as a bad podcast, it's definitely one of the biggest on YouTube, and to be a co-host on that show, it makes your life financially much easier. Months after George left Impaulsive, it was clear he was much happier, being able to communicate to guests properly and not feel like a third wheel. It was clear George's podcast was beginning to gather interest, as he was able to attract guests that had never been on Impaulsive before. Some guests began questioning what had happened between him, Logan and Mike, and bit by bit, George slowly began to discuss the situation. On an episode with Gideon, George began to explain the Impaulsive episode where Logan criticized Christianity.
I know Logan behind closed doors. I know he has very terrible qualities, but I also know he's a very good man too. He has a good heart. He does good things. So when I saw him do this, I begged him not to post it. Not because of me. I knew I was going to be like, oh, this is great. This is going to make me look amazing.
Yeah.
But I knew it was going to hurt my friend's image, like in a really bad way. So I begged him 3 times, don't post that video. Sometimes people got to make their own mistakes.
Yeah.
And maybe what he's going through now is his relationship with God. And I just pray that him and his future family are good and they're protected and they find a God instead of trying to be God.
During this period, George's perspective became very public, leading Mike Maylak to respond on Adam 22's podcast, explain how him and Logan are alpha males.
What happened with the George situation? I gotta ask that, because that's what the people want to know.
I don't want to say he was like almost too pure for the show. He would just get like abused by like certain guests, and it was kind of like fucked. Because you gotta understand. And
was it the Shaq episode or Bobby Lee?
Bobby, like all, you gotta understand it. And I think a part of that was based on like seating and also like the fact that me and Logan are such big personalities. So by way of him not being able to like super vocalize, he kind of like perceivably assumed the role of like the beta, which he wasn't.
Yeah.
But like guests would, when they would get like kind of uncomfortable or whatever with conversation, they would turn and kind of pick on him.
This was the first time Mike had really spoken on the drama. Following his side of the story on what had happened, he went on to say how happy he is for George and his new podcast, implying they're still mates.
Kudos to him. He's got his own show now. It's going
I've
great.
seen it.
He's had great guests on. He's been able to do something more aligned with his purpose in life.
A few weeks after this podcast, Mike had clipped up this part and uploaded it to TikTok, conveying him and George are on good terms. Yet this couldn't be further from the truth, as George responded on Twitter, and it was clear he was pissed off. Mike, could you please refrain from implying that we're friends when we're not? If you're interested, you're welcome to come on and discuss the truth. I'm just not into the fake stuff. Now, a few months later, George would release a podcast that would change his life forever, an interview with Andrew Tate. In the interview, they spoke about religion and mental health, topics that were disregarded and laughed off on Impaulsive. Andrew was visibly impressed with George's ability to conduct an interview, and even brought a side out of Andrew Tate no one had really ever seen.
I'll be honest with you, and I actually respect, and you've given me a lot to think about. And without being arrogant, at my echelon, it's not often I sit down with somebody and they say something that makes me think. But you've given me something to think about, and I genuinely, I'm going to think about it.
In just 24 hours, the podcast had reached over 2 million views, and as of January the 23rd, it now sits on 11 million. To put this all in perspective, this would be Impaulsive third most popular podcast ever. Considering the podcast has only been out for a month, it's incredibly impressive, as for a new podcast to reach great accomplishments under a year, shows that George's decision to leave Impaulsive was 100% worth it, but most of all, it shows Logan was wrong.
People watch, and without people watching, I just have a show like.
Following the success of the Andrew Tate podcast, George has discussed on how that podcast was able to show his true abilities as a podcaster. In fact, when he was on Impaulsive, he was never able to truly express himself properly.
We see this side of you every single day.
So thank you for saying that, bro.
Yeah,
Well said.
Because that is such a perfect way of saying it. This is the real me, but for some reason I didn't show it. I had this like, it's so funny. This episode set me free, bro. I just realized that, oh, how I really am is what they want. My best friend said something that really like shaped my heart. He goes, bro, you realize you were shooting with people that don't have your views. They don't have your mindset. So you're kind of like, think of it as stand up. You're performing for not your audience. And he goes, and how hard is it to perform when it's not your audience? And I go,
You could be saying the funniest jokes in the world.
almost impossible sometimes.
Yeah.
When this episode released, when we finished the episode, Andrew got up, looked me right in my eyes, right in front of you guys. He goes, this one's gonna go crazy.
George opens up that when he left Impaulsive, he was scared of what the future would entail. Following all the YouTube videos bashing George's reputation, that he wasn't a comedian that could take a joke, and just people laughing at him, he was worried if he was ever going to rectify it. And now thanks to this Andrew Tate interview, everyone now sees him in a positive way.
When I left Impaulsive, it did. I was scared and I was confused and I was lost and I was frustrated and I was angry, but God kept telling me, be quiet, keep moving. The shock factor of like, oh, this is the guy from Impaulsive that wouldn't shut up or say something weird. That image of me was now removed completely. And it's so crazy because I want to circle back to this. The thing that hurt me the most when all this was happening in the beginning, when I had the dreams, when I had all this stuff and God was telling me to be quiet, all I kept seeing are those YouTube videos every day of people making like things. And when the video went up and I saw all these people making videos like of the new version that they saw me as, and I literally go, my God could change the whole world's heart.